stuff. How I've set up the PowerPoint is you don't have to take notes on your phone or take pictures of stuff. This will be delivered to you, and I've set it up that you'll know what we're talking about on the slides. So you know how there's some slides that are just like a pretty picture of a beach and you have no clue what you were talking about. That's not at all how I've set up the slides. But I am starting this morning with, this is what we're going to be talking about. Here's the agenda. Again, it'll all be with you on your slides. This. So who owns a nonprofit versus who owns a for-profit, like a corporation?
I don't think anyone else.
Ding, 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 gold star. I actually should have gotten gold star. I put that on you. Talk about why does no one own a nonprofit?
Because it's not really, like, no one's actually getting profited from it. Like, it's for the people or the community that the nonprofit is set up for.
Awesome. That's why it's also called a non-profit, right? What about a for-profit or a corporation? Who owns that? Yes. Talk to me more about shareholders and what they do.
I don't know, in instances, they have percentages of ownership, whether it's 100%
Correct.
or not 100% with partners, so.
So with those two definitions, what does a nonprofit board do versus a for-profit board? We will ask that question again at the end. This is your pre-test, right? So this is why nonprofits have boards. Yes, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit this morning of, the essential roles of what the board does. But if there's anything that you remember from today, it should be these three things of why nonprofits have boards. They're legally required to by law, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility. What's fiduciary mean? It's a big word that basically means you have to steward the resources well, right? So that you have to make sure the nonprofit business, because it is a business despite it also having a mission to serve the public, right? That you make sure people get paid and they take care of their bills. The third piece, this is really the important thing that I want you also to remember about nonprofits. You are stewarding the resources that they get from the public on behalf of the public. And that's really important because there is no ownership, right? So you're there in terms of a civic duty on behalf of your friends and neighbors in your community to make sure you're doing well by them by taking care of this money or these group of people or this mission, right? Okay. In nonprofit speak, what they always say that a board does is duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. Obedience is like my marriage vows, right? Which also say you have to be obedient to your husband. And I look at my husband and I'm like, really? Right? So again, it really is a archaic language, but it breaks down to this, right? It's also like being on a jury, right? Like the 12 people who just said, Mr. Trump, you're guilty of all of these things, right? It's ordinary people. Our board members are ordinary people. The reason why I compare it to a jury is this. Nonprofit organizations are the only businesses in this country that are managed by everyday people. I might not have an expertise in caring for unhoused people in our community, but that doesn't prevent me from being a board member for Friends of the Homeless. I might not be an expert in childcare, but that doesn't prevent me from being a board member for the United Way, right? Or Square One, right? So it's our friends and neighbors who run these organizations. And so that's why this notion of duty of care, duty of obedience, and loyalty, while old word, are more archaic language, just really means be the stand-up person you are. Make sure that you're stewarding the resources, make sure you understand the mission, and make sure you're using common sense. We will talk about common sense throughout this presentation, just because common sense is really what's going to drive a lot of your expertise in being a board member. Okay. We three, Shannon, Sarah, and myself, who have been hired by the United Way to present this stuff, believe very strongly in this. There might be 20 people on your board, but the board speaks with one voice when speaking to the CEO or the executive director of the organization. It is not 20 individual bosses, because really, who wants 20 bosses? Nobody, right? But it is also very important as board members that you work with the collective board to make sure that it's only one message that goes to the CEO. Can you imagine having 20 bosses? I mean, that sucks, right? So it's really important that there is only one collective boss to the CEO or the executive director. So here we go. Roles and responsibilities, right? We are going to talk about establishing identity and direction. That really speaks to articulating what the mission of the organization is. So who here works at a nonprofit? Okay, what is the mission of your nonprofit?
Localize community resources to meet community needs.
Okay, so how does the board talk to you guys about how you do that work?
How do they?
Or do they do it badly? Because we can talk about that too.
Right. I guess I would say it's conversational, and it's kind of an ongoing discussion of what the resources are, how we're mobilizing them,
Right.
what the needs are, so it's
And how long have you been at your organization?
1 year.
Okay, where were you in a nonprofit before then?
I was in higher ed.
Okay, so higher ed's a nonprofit, right? So higher ed's is an interesting, let's go there really quick, right? Because with higher ed, there is the general mission to educate, right? But then how that becomes operationalized, those are conversations the board has with the president of a college, university, private school, right? And that goes to identifying the direction and establishing what the direction is, right? So I was a professor at Bay Path University. When I was there, I helped run the nonprofit program. The nonprofit program isn't there anymore at Bay Path. That doesn't mean Bay Path has changed their mission. It's just that they've decided to allocate their resources and to identify how to use those resources in a different way. Does that make sense? Awesome. Okay, so resources. What are resources that nonprofits need? People. What else? Money. That's pretty much all of it, right? There's everything in the middle, like you need a desk. Or if you have kids, you might want a playground for the kids, right? All of those things, but it's the people and the money. It is really important for being a board member to ask questions on both the people and the money. You can't have one without the other, right? Because if you don't have people, how are you gonna get the work done? And really for boards, it's always good to ask, do you have the right people? And do you have enough people? One of the big conversations that has been happening lately, especially in a post-COVID environment, is around work equity. Are you building success of your organization on the backs of people who are overworked, underpaid, and always tired? Which is, let's be honest, like especially as women, and we are all women in the room, that's just who we are and what we do as a default. But self-care has been definitely something that many of us have talked about. So don't forget to bring your honest self to the board, that if things like work equity and self-care are important to you as a person, it should also be important to the organization that you are a board member for, and those are things that you should advocate for as well. Okay? And I'm speaking at that also, someone who's recovering from burnout. Okay, oversight. What does oversight really mean, do you think, from like a board perspective? Is it like micromanaging? Is that oversight? Or, I mean, do you get to help out and pick the color of the napkins and the paper plates for the fundraiser? Is that oversight? Like, what should oversight, what do you guys think oversight should look like from a board perspective?
I think just like making sure the mission is being accomplished on a higher level,
Mhm.
instead of focusing on the small things like you just mentioned.
So framing what you said a different way to think about this. We've already talked about how it's everyday people who are on boards. The best thing that everyday people can bring to a board is to ask questions, to make sure that the mission is being served, that the resources are being used well. You don't have to know all the answers. You want to just ask the right questions. And that's, again, where common sense comes in. Does that also make sense with everyone? Great. Okay. Here are the committee structures that you want on a board. Again, this might go over your head right now. You might not remember, but it's on the slide. You will get the slides, right? So finance, money, governance, oversight, resource development. What's the difference between resource development, you think, and finance?
Is finance like utilizing the funds that you have, and resource development would be like, how do you get more funds?
Absolutely. And it's not, and think about resources. What did we say that nonprofits needed? Right. Resource development is not just about money. One of the great things that everyday common people bring to the board is knowing everyday common people in the community. So if someone's looking for a new front desk receptionist, the board is a great place to be able to help to filter candidates and be ambassadors to talk about how kick-ass the organization is, and they might know stuff, right? Okay, I'm gonna skim through these really quick because you can read, again, what we talked about with the finance committee, is making sure that the board understands, first of all, and this is my big mini soapbox moment, that every single board member can read the budget of the organization. Okay? Most people don't have checkbooks anymore. So a lot of people don't even know how to balance a checkbook because they don't have checkbooks, right? But I have resources at the end of this presentation that will show you, here are great YouTube videos that you can go to learn how to read a balance sheet. A lot of it is just money in, money out. The biggest difference that the finance committee works on with the treasurer and with the organization, also nonprofits deal with debt differently than for-profit corporations. And there's also this notion of deferred revenue, which are pledges. So in town, we have New England Public Media. You've seen on PBS, and also you've heard on the radio fund drives, right? So they ask you for a pledge. And so how nonprofits manage pledges is very different than how for-profits do. I'm getting in the weeds. You will see that on a YouTube video that you can get on a link at the end of this. Okay, governance committee. This is really about the ongoing board development too. And again, an important piece to know is ongoing. Just because you've gotten together as a board, it's not like your professional development ends at the time of you becoming a board member. Just like when we work in our own organization, so much of professional development we get, or should get, as staff, is learning how to work together, right? Learning how to problem solve together, and learning how to support the organization that we are the board member for. And that's really what the governance committee does. Resource development, making sure this committee gets money and people to help with the organization. Here's the important thing also with the resource development committee. Just because you have a committee that's in charge of getting people and money, should other board members help in getting people and money? Gold stars for everything. Right. So, just because you're on the board, and just because your organization has a CEO or an executive director, doesn't mean leadership is compartmentalized just to the CEO and to the executive director. This notion of governance as leadership is that there are 3 different areas that boards can help and work with the CEO or the executive director to run the organization as a whole, right? Because going back to what we said earlier, boards are there to steward the resources that they gather for the public benefit. We also know that the more people you have helping, right, many hands make light work. And this is really this notion. Just another way to think about governance as leadership as a 3-legged stool. Here's why it works when it works. The last thing you want to do as a volunteer board member is have a job that's a time suck and an emotional suck, and that you're not getting joy out of your work, right? I'm all about not like eliminating things that don't give me joy. And so these are tools to really make sure that your board service gives you meaning as well, because that, you know, makes you want to go to the meeting, right? Okay, so in the fiduciary mode, here's the core work. The important but really boring stuff is the whole legal compliance and fiduciary compliance, because once you'll find out with your board service, as you find out for your organization, there are things like doing your audit, making sure you submit reports to the state, reports to the federal IRS, then depending on, for example, if you're doing a fundraiser where there's a raffle, you have to submit to the town that you're in, get a permit for that. There's all of this stuff that you have to do that's legally required. And if you don't know all the legal requirements, ask. Whatever question you ask as a board around a lot of this stuff, someone else has had these questions for 6 months, 3 years, and hasn't asked yet. So this is really why it is important to ask questions. Be that person known for asking the questions. And again, the last bullet point, monitoring results. Ask how you guys do that. Ask how the organization does that. Okay, strategic mode. We all know about strategic planning. This is really the framework to think about the strategic work and planning for the organization. This is my favorite mode of what the board does. Generative is another way to just talk about brainstorming. Right? Brainstorming for the board is really important, and this is the conversation you have with either senior staff and the CEO or the executive director, or even just the executive director, because for me, this is the important work of envisioning the future. Like, what would it look like if we had enough resources to solve hunger, housing, and educational needs in our community? This is like the stuff of why I join boards, because it gives me joy, not just to solve problems, but to solve problems collectively with the neighbors of my community, right? And too often in nonprofit organizations, we get bogged down in the busyness of the work. We forget that we're there to be a solution to a problem. And it's also hard, right? All nonprofits right now, undersourced, understaffed, like we don't have enough resources. So because resources are finite in nonprofit organizations, the generative mode, the brainstorming mode is really important to creatively problem solve when time is your most scarce resource. Let me stop here. I've thrown a lot of stuff at you guys. Does anyone have questions right now? Okay. But feel free to speak up at any point. So again, using these three modes of thinking as a board member and to take time out to have conversations at board meetings where you're like, okay, today let's be generative. Then another meeting we can be, let's think in the fiduciary mode. And then in another meeting, let's think strategically, right? The payoff is the board, CEO, or executive director partnership. And trust, right? Because relationships, especially in nonprofit organizations, only move as fast as the speed of trust. And that's really the framework of what we've been talking about here to make sure you, as a board, trust the CEO and the executive director, and then vice versa. That the executive director, if there's a shortfall, let's say, I'm consulting with an organization right now where the director of development didn't want to tell the CEO that they were short $250,000. That's a lot of money for a small organization. She didn't trust the executive director didn't trust the board. So who loses out? But not the staff. It's the community that loses out from not having resources and services of $250,000. Okay. Here we go. In this short time we have together, I'd love to say that I'm so skilled and talented that I can impart through osmosis how to read a balance sheet to all of you. I'm not that smart, and I don't have that superpower. So what I do have are three of my favorite links that'll show you how to read a budget, an income statement, and explain what the audit and the 990 is. So this, again, you'll get the slide deck. This will be your cheat sheet to know how to do these things. So, but someone talk to me. Does someone know what cash flow is? Can someone explain cash flow? You're looking at a friend. Lovely friend.
Yeah. I mean, in simplistic terms, it's the inflows and outflows of the cash.
Why is it important in an organization?
Because I feel like an organization makes a budget at the beginning of the year, and you need to know where you are in relation to that budget.
Absolutely.
With cash flow.
Cash is king, right? Like, we all know this in our own lives. It's like, how many times you're like, oh my God, we want to plan a vacation, but I have to wait till I get my paycheck. Do I have enough cash to make groceries, right? It's the same thing in organizations. This is the one aspect of oversight that the board really needs to make sure that an organization is on top of, right? Going back to the organization that is calling me to help them with their shortfall of $250,000 they're short. I mean, they don't now, because they're short that much money and that money hasn't come in, the question on a cash flow for them is, do they have enough money to make payroll? Right? Do they have enough money to pay the vendors for the services that are coming in? So cash flow is one of those key items to know about, and again, to ask questions. Okay. Should board members give money to an organization if they're giving time and volunteering as board members?
I think if they can, they should.
Okay,
As long as they can afford it.
absolutely. So let's talk about can't afford it. What does that mean, can't afford it?
Or it depends on the budget and their financial situation.
So how much money should a board member give an organization? The answer is what they can afford. Do not discriminate from asking everyone to participate regardless of what you know of their financial income. Because here's the most important fact to take away. Poor people give more of their income base to philanthropic causes than rich people do. Yes, we all want a grant from Mackenzie. Right? Like, I'm praying that they find me. I've like Googled ways to like reach out to her. But yes, you know, it's almost like we all wanted a car from Oprah too, right? But again, invite everyone to make a gift. Getting a gift from all of your board members is an important vote of confidence that your board members believe in the organization, that you as a board member are here like you're putting your money where your mouth is. And it doesn't have to be a lot. When I first joined a board, I started with making a gift that I could afford as a college student at that time, $25. And yes, this was the early 90s, and $25 then definitely paid for more in life than $25 does now. But again, it is a vote of confidence in the mission of the organization. That is why I deeply believe all board members should give something to the organization. My favorite gift ever that I ever got as a fundraiser when I worked for Shelter for the Homeless in Stamford, Connecticut. We had a board that also had some of our clients from the shelter on our board. I got a $5 money order from one of our clients. And he said, I'm not gonna drink today. I'm giving you my $5. Right? Okay. Another reason why boards should give, and giving 100%, is foundations and other funders in your community will look for 100. Plate, she put in $1 and she'd like fish for like, 50 cents out. That's how she bought bubble gum apparently after church. This is one of my favorite kind of ways to also talk about board governance. Everyone can be an ambassador. It doesn't take much. If you believe in the mission of the organization, everyone on the board can be an ambassador. Most people can be advocates. There are definitely going to be introverts on your board as a whole that might struggle with talking in front of people, right? So not everyone can talk in front of people to advocate well, but definitely there will be opportunities for board members to have coffee, tea, drinks, one-on-one, right? There are some people that can be askers, literally asking for money on behalf of your organization. Some people just don't want to do that. They'll give money themselves, but they don't want to ask money. And the reason for this, it's not that some people suck, but there are those people that do. But different people have different relationships, and some of it is based on trauma with money, right? And so you don't also want to re-traumatize someone and trigger someone based on past history on the relationship with money. Like, yes, it's a nonprofit board, but it's not therapy. Although there are some boards around our community that there definitely is drama, right? But we don't want to re-trigger individuals on that. So, questions. I know some of you put questions in when you registered. One of them, and I'll start with this and then I will open it up, the question is, where do you find good board members? Other than United Way finding all of you coming into this room, you'll all be kick-ass board members, but where do you find board members?
In your network?
Absolutely. Sarah remembers this because this is one of the ways that we became good friends. When my kiddo was 1.5, I was done reading Goodnight Moon and singing Itsy Bitsy Spider for like the 150th time in a day. And I was like, I really need to be with grown-ups. I love my kid. But so I actually did what I called the Playground Network. We lived in Amherst at that time. I went to Groff Park and I talked to other parents that were there, and I said, so who are the nonprofits that you guys volunteer for? And the Fine Arts Center at UMass was one of them, and that's when I reached out and said, I want to join your board because I really can't read Goodnight Moon anymore. And Sarah and I were on that board, and that's how we became friends. But so that's one way, like finding moms or parents who are done with reading Goodnight Moon is one way to do that. But I always bring that up because board service is one of those things that for folks who have a gap in their work history because of choice for medical reasons or for taking care of kids, it's one way to close a gap in a resume. So that's just something to think about. And that was one of the things that I was worried about at that time too. We adopted my son and I'm like, I'm gonna be home with him. There will be this gap on my resume, and volunteer work is one of those ways that you can address that gap or also acquire another skill set. So where else? Someone said network, but like, what does that look like? What does that mean? CrossFit is, if one of my friends were here, they'd say, yeah, when she lifts weights, that she just talks about Girls Inc. all the time. Like, that's what she does. Where have you gotten your best board members, Shannon?
I think it's just more about
engaging yourself in opportunities to, meet different people. I think we talked about this last time. So what are the events going on in your community that are promoting ways for you to meet people? Are there different, like a chamber of commerce, if you're working in a business where you can go? I think it's talking to your coworkers and talking to families and your family and friends. Reaching out, like I said, to the different organizations that you may be interested in, going and meeting with them, talking to their staff, and building your network in that way and learning from their experiences as well.
Let's have an honest conversation about asking for donations and asking family to be on boards. What do you all think? Yay, nay?
You mean like if I ask someone in my family to be on the board that I'm on?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would feel comfortable asking family for donations as long as, like, if I believe in it and support it, I know they would believe in it and support it.
So it's Thanksgiving and then I'm sitting next to you and I'm your long lost cousin. And I'm like, dude, you're asking me for $100 again to give to the food bank? And your response is?
Yes, I am. We need money and I don't have it. Help me.
And then the follow-up to that, and if you don't give me the money, give us the money. Here's the thing, I'm not asking for me, I'm asking on behalf of the community, but if you don't give, that's okay too. That's the most important caveat to really learn in board service. You are never asking for yourself. You are always asking on behalf of someone else and making a positive impact for the community. What happens if your organization is in crisis and you wake up on Saturday morning and you see on the front page of the Republican, such and such organization has been expected of fraud, CEO is under investigation, and so is the board. After you say WTF and grab a cup of coffee, and if you were my house, there will be many more expletives, what do? You're a board member.
Call. Engage with them, see what's going on, what's happening.
Ask questions. Okay? This is the most important thing board members can do, is ask questions. Because as a board member, you have a personal liability to be the steward of those resources, right? And as a fiduciary agent. And here's the thing, it's a litigious society. They can sue you if they wanted to. Remember when I said I joined a board when I was in college, $25? After being on that board second year, I didn't ask questions. Come to find out that the general manager of that small theater company didn't know how to use Excel well. So they would input the checks that we received, and if they made a mistake, they'd erase that and re-enter it. So it was an inputting error, which created a shortfall of $50,000. Tiny theater company. Because I was on the board, we were held accountable to pay for the payroll for the interns and the staff. So thank God I had a credit card at that point, but all of us had to contribute like $2,000 to $3,000 each as a board member. like as a 20-year-old young woman, putting $3,000 on my credit card, like I cried. Because it was the world. Like $3,000 was a lot of money, but it taught me the biggest lesson, right? Ask questions.
And understand that.
And-
That's fiduciary responsibility.
And that's fiduciary responsibility. Like I didn't realize that as a board member, I'd be on the hook for payroll.
Read your bylaws. Before you agree to be on a board, read your bylaws. 1, 2, ask if the D&O insurance policy is paid. That protects you.
Talk to us about D&O.
Sorry,
No.
Director and Officer Insurance. That is the policy that covers the board members. If indeed something happens, like Rima said, that you're liable for payroll, your bylaws say that you're liable as a board member. However, your D&O policy may cover that on behalf of the board member. So as an incoming board member, if you're asked to be a board member, make sure you ask lots of questions, especially what the bylaws say and the Director and Officer Insurance. You want to be sure that it covers you as an individual and the liabilities that you sign up for as a board member. And make sure the executive director, finance person, whomever it is that pays for that policy, it's paid.
It's maybe those big ones, yeah.
Because a lot of people don't ask, and then you see on the news on a Saturday morning that XYZ company CEO is under investigation, CFO is under investigation. They're gone, can't ask questions. You gotta call, you gotta pay for payroll on Monday. Give me $5,000. Where's our D&O policy?
Right. But I will close, not as a Debbie Downer. So, and this was 2014. I was running an arts organization in East Hampton. We had a huge capital campaign to raise money for programs and services. And we've been talking about, for the whole year, and Sarah helped me do this, the role of the board in getting people and resources for the organization. So one of my board members was in Seattle smoking a joint before it was legal with one of his friends. And they were talking, and my board member was talking to his friend over this joint of the importance of this organization and the arts and how arts are healing and really bring a community together. And this was the question that was asked of him. So if I gave you $1 million, what would you do with it? And the board member said, here's what we would do. We would set aside some money for a cash reserve because you never know. And we do X, Y, and Z. I got the call the next day, we got the $1 million.
Whoa.
This is why you talk to your board members about being advocates and ambassadors and askers. So they can have these conversations while stoned, even, when they're asked of them. I bring this up and I close with this is, I didn't get the money. I did it as the executive director of this board. What I did make sure was I did all of these things that we just talked about. So my board member was ready to be in the right